and welcome to our talk, the place where we agree to disagree, if we disagree at all. My guest today is Barbara Simonson from Hamburg, and our topic is own opinion. Hello, Barbara. Welcome.
Yes, hello.
I'm very happy that you joined me today. We have an interesting topic. I think it's very important in this time and age to have an own opinion and stand up for it. So, this is going to be our topic.
Yeah, great idea. I think it's in general important, and it takes some courage, and courage is the power of the heart. So if you are in your heart, you are courageous.
Well put. That's a great introduction. Let me quickly let me quickly introduce you to our viewers and say a few words about you, Barbara. The biography of Barbara Catherine Simonson in a few sentences. Barbara has a degree in political science, which might come in handy if our conversation should turn towards freedom of speech, a hot topic, explosive topic currently. Barbara has been a prolific author over 3 decades on matters of health and spirituality, always with a strong opinion, considered controversial by some. Always, maybe instead of controversial, we should say ahead of her time. And for example, she voiced well substantiated opinions about absentee initiations already 25 years ago when she wrote her book, The Authentic Reiki. And with that, she was way ahead of the discussion, catalyzed by, of course, Corona. Barbara is a full professional Reiki teacher and has taught numerous Reiki students worldwide. She has trained with masters of Western Reiki styles as well as Japanese Reiki. But most famously, she was taught by Barbara Weber Ray of the Radiance Technique. Hello, Barbara.
Yes, hello.
Barbara, is there anything you want to add or correct to my introduction?
But yeah, there was one little fault. I was never trained by a um, Reiki teacher. I know Ayawa Peta, who was yeah, who was married to a Japanese, so I have the connection. But when I read Dr. Shui's handbook, I realized that this would not be possible in Western countries. That you put your fingers in the mouth, into the ears, etc., etc. I have also a training as a healing practitioner, and even as a healing practitioner, it's forbidden. So I think that Hawayo Takata was sort of genius when she came with all the knowledge and initiation. She came to Hawaii, and I think she reduced everything to the chakra system, so that you even don't have to touch. She did it, but you even don't have to touch your patient. And I think this was a great idea. Also, what she invented about the story that Dr. Shui was a Christian monk, etc., etc. Because at that time, when she brought all the knowledge to Hawaii, to the American states, because of World War II, um, nobody would have followed any Reiki teacher because the Japanese were the enemies of the United States, and they were even concentrated in camps. You can imagine. And I think this was a genius idea too. First, to reduce everything to the chakra system, though she doesn't
Well,
use didn't use a name, and then to make it a Christian sort of Christian method. What it
well,
probably was, no? If the history tells us that Dr. Shui was was a Buddhist, not a Christian monk,
Well,
living
I
in a.
don't want to go there, Barbara. I don't want to go into the history
No, no, no,
of
no,
the.
no. But I think she was genius in these two aspects. I think we can all give thanks to her because she was a simple woman. Yeah.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there. Let's talk about your opinions. And I agree with you, Barbara, with your brief looking back. And I'm glad that you brought up that sometimes a presentation serves a purpose, which is quite okay at the time, but with distance looking back, that opinion can actually be controversial, or even, as in the case you stated, by many, it would have been considered as presenting a falsehood. So, yesterday's opinion is today's falsehood potentially. And that's the kind of thing I want to speak to you about. And I want to speak because, and it's already visible, because you have powerful opinions. I want to not so much look back in history, but look at where we are today, at the current situation, at how you are rubbing up against society, against I don't know, your partner, uh, if and when you have a strong opinion. And you already said that oftentimes it takes a lot of courage. In fact, I have prepared for some light amusement a little video, and let me show you the introduction of what this man says about opinion. Here we go.
If you refrain from giving your opinion, it could change your life. It changed mine. I'm a recovering, arrogant, opinionated know-it-all. And you might have someone in your life like that. Maybe it's you.
So you might appreciate that this is a rather provocative kind of statement. But then he goes on to speak about what opinion is from his point of view. So let's listen to how he continues.
Dictionary defines opinion as a view or judgment about something not necessarily based on fact or knowledge. And that's important because we accidentally relate to our opinions like they are true or factual, but they're not. Facts are factual. Opinions, those are just interpretations, point of view, preference. And our opinions are emotionally charged triggers that have the potential to create conflict and rob you of your peace of mind.
So would you go along with his definition of opinion?
I think, yeah, I think uh, there's a saying of Rumi. He says, "We are going to meet in the area where beyond yes and no." So this is, I think, enlightened people. They are always astonished, like little children, and they don't judge. So opinion is a part of our um, ego mind. I think Eckhart Tolle says, and before we are enlightened, we have opinions, of course, but to realize that the opinions are not us, that they have nothing to do with our eternal higher self, for instance, is very important. So that you are tolerant, that you don't identify with your opinions. And I remember a video by Eckhart Tolle, and there he had an audience, and there was one man insisting on his opinion, like a property, like my house, my wife, my children, etc. And Eckhart Tolle was laughing for minutes, for minutes. And during this scene, my children entered the room. They were teenagers at that time, and they thought I was crazy, looking to this funny guy who was laughing for minutes. And I think this was totally great that you pretend to own something. The whole concept of ownership is crazy because you cannot, you cannot take anything after death. You can, you can your children might benefit or so, but you have nothing to it's not like the ancient Egyptians thought all these horses, all these gold, all these furniture, all these food, etc. You cannot take anything with you. And
Yes.
um, so for me, the whole concept of my opinion is ridiculous. And
Yes.
if you are aware, you don't identify with your opinions, you are open, you are tolerant, you are open to change your opinions. And I think this is important. You cannot, before enlightenment, you cannot have no opinions. This is also illusion. But to regard your opinions as something, um, something unreal, I think this is very important.
I agree
So,
with you. And the question of reality and fact, that's what the man also alluded to. I will put his name and the reference in the description of our video later on. And I think the reality and the truth or the factual is very important. But of course, there is a lot of gray area in between. And dear viewers, I want you to know that in my research over the years, I have been finding it very difficult to speak to the radiance technique representatives. I have found it very difficult to speak to masters trained from that lineage within the Reiki community, except for Barbara. She has been available. I spoke to you the first time, I think, in 2015 when I did the research for my documentary interview with Phyllis Furumoto. And I was wondering, Barbara, and this is one of the burning questions for me. I have, in your opinion, why is it that this lineage is so protective for their truth, for their opinion, to the point that it creates, there has been a book that came out 2 years ago by Shoshana Shea about Reiki history, where practically three-quarters of the book is more or less what has been published already 30 years ago. And when being approached to speak about these things and to compare them with facts and figures of modern times, I and other researchers didn't get anywhere. I'm not the only one. Do you have an explanation for being so elusive in that part of where your training is also rooted?
yeah, I think it's of course also ego thing that you have to pretend that you have the best Reiki on the whole world, though Mrs. Takada taught 22 teachers. And so it's in my point of view, it's strange, it's even crazy to say we have the best Reiki method on the whole world. It's not possible. If you don't know all the other Reiki, you can say, well, I think we belong to one of the best Reiki systems that's available on the market. But this is something different. Then you, in opposition, the Radiant Technique Association International says that all other Reiki systems are not valid, that they are not working. And I think this is one of the reasons why we separated. I don't belong to the organization anymore. And I got, of course, a furious letter by Dr. Ray. And she says, well, your initiations, you as humans are not working anymore because you don't belong to the organization anymore. And when I had the teachers training, they told us the initiations would last forever, the attunements. And so I think this is a big contradiction. And what I now realize, because I have more than 11,000 students by now, is that it is very well working. So that's the reason why so many people take the higher degrees up to 7th degree, become Reiki teacher, etc. If it wouldn't work, nobody would show off and come to my seminars. So this is a lie. Sorry, this is a lie. This is, and I don't understand this too, because it is sort of old age thinking. In the age of Aquarians, you try to realize that we are brothers and sisters and behave differently. It is a matter of consciousness. If you are in this ego stuff of being, you have to be the best, you have to put down all competitors in order to make your light shine even better. This is so much old age that I also cannot comprehend. I cannot understand why they don't see this makes the whole thing poisons the whole matter. That people outside, they think, and even from other Reiki lineages, methods, they think the people from the Radiance Technique Association International, they are just crazy, just mind oriented. It's just ego stuff. It's a matter of power. It's a matter of money, and this is my opinion, because there is no other reason. It is just crazy. And also Eckhart Tolle says to be identified with your ego mind is a disease. That's a common disease. And I can only feel pity, because when somebody has a cold, I'm not fighting with him or her. You see, it's just a matter of feeling pity. And I think compassion is the right attitude to deal with this ego stuff. This is my opinion.
I can subscribe to that. That's, of course, an ongoing process in life, that we're confronting our own ego, or trying to liberate or catch out where we have victimized ourselves to our own ego and liberate ourselves.
If you have the aim, if you say this is a technique for enlightenment, you have to be critical with yourself.
Yes.
You have to reflect your own words. You have to reflect what you do. And if you don't have the whole approach is not working. Then forget about enlightenment, forget about unconditional love, because this is contradictory in my opinion.
Fair enough. Now, you have just now been somewhat critical about historic developments where people have taken a stance of my way of doing things is the right one and other ways are the wrong ones. Yet your own book is called The Authentic Reiki, which implies the same kind of claim. Mine is authentic, and by implication, mine wouldn't be.
Yes.
So can
I choose the title on purpose, because I know that there's a lot on the market of Reiki systems that don't work. People tell me that if they treat other people, they pick up symptoms, they feel drained after a treatment, etc. And this for me means that it is not the original system. Because in the original system, you only activate universal energy, and that is always, you experience always the same. When you treat somebody, it is always a win-win game, that you gain energy. And it's also because it's the highest frequency of energy you're working with, so you're always protected to pick up any negative symptoms. And if this doesn't work, it is not the original and also not the authentic Reiki. So I wanted to make clear that with all things in life, there are differences in quality. It's also Reiki system. I'm not there to say everything is the same, Reiki is Reiki, etc. No, because some systems don't work. I don't know the reasons why, but these people come in my seminars and they make totally different experiences. And so it was a little bit provocative, I have to admit, to call, but I didn't say it's the only authentic Reiki system. I didn't say it in the title, I didn't say it in the book, I don't say it in my seminars and lectures. So that's a main difference. I'm not sort of duplicating the mistakes the Radiance Technique Association International does. But I found my own way. I'm not
Yeah.
pretending that Reiki is the same, but I'm also not pretending that I have the only working system. There's a huge difference, I guess.
My wife and I make similar experiences that we have people attending to our seminars because they are not happy with what they learned elsewhere. Now, there's no question about it.
No, I have to. Sorry, I have to interrupt. It is not what you learn. You can be a brilliant lector, but the quality of the initiations or the quality of the attunements. This is the difference.
I
Because
agree
Dr.
with you.
Shin, or in the ancient times in Egypt, they didn't give seminars. They didn't hand out a handbook. Because the initiation is the heart center of every Reiki seminar. Though it takes only like 20 minutes per person, but
Yeah.
it's so I think the quality of the initiations is the main difference.
I agree with you. And I was about to say that at the end of the day, this is what it boils down to. And a lot has to do with also with the training of the of the other Reiki masters. So that is a issue in the Reiki community globally, that there are some systems or some ways of presenting Reiki, even without attunements and things like that, where then people are unhappy. Yet, I'm also adding, to some extent, I have to be grateful about that, because that is the way I can define myself. And like you yourself, you now made that statement. They come to you. Um, so that's one point. But more relevantly, the what I found in all the conversations with our Java Petter, whom you mentioned, and I'm sorry I had that wrong, because somewhere I read in, I think in a critique of a book of yours in the Reiki magazine or somewhere, the reference that you had actually attended some of his seminars, but obviously you've only been friends. But to me, that's heartwarming, because it shows that you have an open mind, talking to different people, and being, even if you disagree in some of the aspects with it. Now, one of the things which every one of the big protagonists, like Art Java, like many others, say, if initiation is done and is done properly, let's say, for argument's sake, um, and the properly is not defined by superficial criteria, but by more profound elements, as Leon Horowitz in his work exemplified very clearly. But then all these protagonists say the Reiki itself, the energy, so to speak, that's always the same. Would
It's
you
not.
not agree with that?
I don't agree, because if you're not working with the highest frequency of energy, that is for me unconditional love, then only then you are in danger to pick up negative symptoms, because you're not working with the most powerful energy, and also you are in danger to lose your energy, because your partner is working probably with personal energy instead of universal energy. So I wouldn't agree. No.
Okay,
So
well,
it's in the Bible, I don't know it in English. An den Früchten werdet ihr sie erkennen.
yes,
An den Früchten werdet ihr sie erkennen.
by the results you can recognize it.
Yeah, and I think this is the same with Reiki. And I'm quite, as you say, happy, because in every second class or seminar, there's people not satisfied with their Reiki system, and then they read one of my books, and then they realize, oh, it's totally different. It's so simple. You cannot lose your energy, you cannot pick up symptoms, etc. And then they come to my classes. For instance, a couple in Berlin, they treated somebody with migraine, and the migraine went off after the treatment, but they had headaches for more than a week. You see, and they told me they would have picked up his karma of this patient. I said, no, everybody is responsible for her or his own karma. You cannot pick up anybody's karma, and I think you have to be. I don't know the other. You shouldn't tolerate that you feel badly after a treatment you give. You should always feel better. The more treatments, the more you feel better. And I think they didn't work with the. You just said they all work with the same energy. No, I wouldn't agree to that, because otherwise the results would be always the same. The results would be the same, but they were totally different than I experienced in my treatments, and all of my students, they have also totally different experiences.
I disagree with you on the account that where all these protagonists agree that the phenomenon of the energy is then always the same. I think they would all agree with what you just said, and add, if phenomena like you described happen, where the practitioner is getting the headache of the client and things like that, this is a characteristic and an indication that the people are actually not working with Reiki, but with another energy system of some sort.
If you're correctly,
which is probably the result from a lack of proper initiation in the first place. Because once the connection is made to the phenomenon of Reiki, then the characteristics are consistent. And that's the one thing I found, that they all seem to agree, even though in teachings and in styles, there are variations. So that's not so different to what you said.
And also, I think 90% of the Reiki books, they say after a treatment you have to wash your hands under cool water in order to get rid of symptoms.
It's not Reiki then.
Yeah, this is totally. But 90% of all Reiki books, at least I know, there are these curious stories that you shouldn't direct energy towards somebody who is under operation, because they can wake up and see all the doctors around, etc. So this is for me always a sign that they haven't grasped what it's all about, and they are probably not trained correctly. Otherwise, they wouldn't write such. I mean, it's just I don't understand, because it's so simple. You cannot do anything wrong with the true Reiki system. You're always benefiting. The patient is going to benefit. You are going to benefit. So where is the problem?
I am with you, and I find that contradictory when people say in one breath, Reiki is non-manipulative, non-invasive, and it has like a built-in intelligence to find where the client needs it most. And in the next breath, they're saying you have to protect yourself. In fact, I think that's a contradiction, and it's an indication that if people do need to protect themselves, then probably they haven't worked with Reiki, but something else. However, there is a bit of empathy I have for Reiki teachers who teach that kind of thing, like you just described, that you have to protect yourself and clean your hands afterwards. And And by the way, the majority of the people I speak to, um, they understand the Reiki much more in line with what you described. And the literature I'm looking at uh, is not dogmatic about things like you just said. But back to my point of empathy for Reiki teachers who include that into their system, because I found in my observation that many of the Reiki teachers, they simply haven't been trained as Reiki teachers well enough. Their basic training has not been substantial enough, so they had to borrow techniques from other healing methods and introduce them into the Reiki class. Um, and I have a degree of empathy, and even though their initiations to their clients, to their students, may have been correct and may have um, downloaded the Reiki energy into the hands of their clients, the way they present it and the fringes of their teachings are have nothing to do with Reiki. And that student, at the end of the day, he will be in contact with Reiki, irrespective of the nonsense the teacher may have said. Don't you agree with that?
Yes, hopefully they are working with the right energy, but they pretend to work with personal energy. With personal energy, you have only a certain supply. So I know many Geistheiler who work with personal energy, and after 3 or 4 treatments, they have to recover. Yeah, and we recover if we work with the right energy. We recover by treating people. I created one day 7 treatments in a row, 1 hour and half an hour break, and I felt really enlightened afterwards. And there were people suffering from cancer and all sorts of diseases. So I hope that they work with the right energy, just pretending to work with different energies. But I suspect that also because you see, otherwise this cannot happen that you pick up symptoms. So I know that there's also Reiki teachers working not with universal energy that is always harmless, that is the highest frequency of energy available, etc. Because otherwise these things wouldn't happen, and they do.
They do happen. I agree with you. I experienced the same thing. Yet I have an empathy, and most of the empathy, from my point of view, goes actually to the Reiki student who has been with, let's say, not very well informed or knowledgeable Reiki teacher who has added all kinds of things only to fill up his seminar for the lack of in-depth knowledge about Reiki. And I agree with you that one of the characteristics of authentic Reiki would be that after a treatment, you don't take on the symptoms of your clients, that you're protected. And in fact, in all the cases, in the majority of the cases, you feel rejuvenated. You get a Reiki treatment, as it were, yourself as a practitioner when you treat somebody else. And this is one of the landmarks of Reiki, and anything else is an indication, not necessarily, in my opinion, that the energy at hand, which literally, which was transferred from the practitioner to the client, was not Reiki, but the mindset of the practitioner. And of course, if the Reiki teacher has told him, you have to protect yourself, you have to clean, it's dangerous, you have to rub your hands against walls and things like that. Of course, the student's attitude is, oh yeah, I might be infected during the treatment, even though factually it is not. And as we know from medicine, from the placebo and the nocebo effect, that kind of mental attitude then has an effect on how we experience life. But that does not mean that the energy which happened has not been rated.
Yeah, but I think there's some teachers, they have the right energy, pretending not to have the right energies, and then there are of course also Reiki teachers. They work with personal energy. They are not connected with the highest frequency of energy. And what I say is, when they are your students are always afraid to make some faults, then they get demotivating to practice the technique, and this is really bad. Because I want to encourage my students to treat themselves regularly, if possible every day, and of course to also give treatments to others. But when you always have the fear that you could make some faults, you are demotivating, because you are
Yes,
sort of yeah, you want to be successful, yeah, and not to
yes.
be curious which fault you can make. And I think this is also um, yeah, I think it's really a pity. It is really a pity.
Yes, I agree with you very much, Barbara.
And it doesn't
Um,
matter if you. I teach 7 degrees, because we have 7 chakras, and I was initiated by somebody who can do that. But this is not so important. I think the most important thing is that you work with the right frequency of energy. Because also my students, they most of them only will learn first degree, second degree, and third degree, and only few will go on and want to learn all the 7 degrees. Uh, and so it is not so important if you teach 3 degrees or seven, but it is very important that you teach, that you make the right frequency of energy available to your students. This is my point.
I'm with you. I hear you. I'm glad we have the topic of own opinion, and I'm glad we have agreed to disagree as a subtitle. Because, and again, I think the disagreement most of the time is on the more superficial or the less important, and in essence, a lot agreement is there. I want to look at something else, and to get to a closing of our conversation. In the last communication we had, in the preliminary discussion leading up to this, you said um, you consider yourself with own opinion. In German, we use the word vogelfrei, which means free like a bird. And that's, I think, the origin, or that's, I believe, how you meant that term. And I just, before our conversation today, I looked it up, and I was quite surprised. In English, the word vogelfrei, free as a bird, is actually outlawed.
Oh, I'm an author.
And you know what? In German, it's true too. In fact, the sense which you use the term free like a bird has been used up to the 16th century. And Martin Luther still used it in that. But then, after this development, even in German, it had the connotation of being an outlaw. Now, I don't want to go into history or things like that, but I do have a question for you, Barbara, because I consider myself also as somewhat of a free thinker, um, uh, trying to liberate myself from belief systems and mindsets. And I think that's an important contribution to humanity, to be a catalyst for liberation of these belief systems we have in our way. But I pay a high price, because having my own opinion and attempting to be free like a bird, and I'm preaching that to some extent, it also sometimes makes me feel like an outlaw. I expressed my opinion to a group of people only 2 weeks ago, very strongly, and maybe the form how I expressed it was inappropriate. I plead guilty on that. Um, Not on the criticism, but on the form. And of course, you know how it is. The messenger of bad news is getting shot.
Yes.
So is becoming an outlaw. With your drive for being this opinionated, strong, opinionated in the positivist sense of the world, how much of a price have you paid to be sometimes like an outlaw? And have you ever felt that way?
Yes, I did, especially when I was hired by the uh, by the Radio Technique Association International. I feel like that, and I thought I needed something like an organization to feel linked to a sort of spiritual family. But then Dr. De Vrevel told me, well, there is a little story, a little Buddhist story. There are demons. There are they want to influence mankind in a very bad way, and they inspire them to found an organization. And I thought, wow, this is it, because as soon till we are not enlightened, an organization means that there are a lot of egos coming together. Yeah? And then it's dealing with money, with power, with being the best, etc., etc. And then I realized, no, this is not, I'm born in the sign of Aquarius. This is not what I want. I want to be free. I want to tolerate that I have no shelter, I have nobody to protect, etc., etc. And also in my book topics, I wrote a book versus Ritalin some 25 years ago. Hyperactivity, why Ritalin is not the solution, and good healthy alternatives that will help. And when writing my book on stevia, I attacked the sugar industry, I attacked the artificial sweetness industry, etc. So I think I left home with 16 years old. I'm not believing in authorities. And so I feel responsible only towards my higher self or to God. And I think the benefits of being of being an outlaw, they are much greater than the disadvantage of not having an own opinion. And I'm also only interested in people who allow themselves the luxury of having own opinions. For me, other people that only follow the rules are sort of boring. Sorry. Um, I think the corona sort of crisis has also shown that I was struck by surprise. I was really shocked that so many people, just like in Hitler Germany, were sort of drilled to follow any rules, not investigating them, not um, asking themselves if they were right or wrong. They just followed the official politics. And so I realized I'm sort of an exception. I thought before that much more people were thinking, thinking by themselves. And now many of my friends have changed. So I have a lot of new friends, and I lost a lot of people where I thought they were friends, but they were not, because they sort of they sometimes attacked me, didn't speak with me anymore because I had a different opinion, different than mainstream. And I think I always thought that we had a totally different mentality now, we Germans. But I had to realize that this is an illusion, that it's not the case. And so it was a little a shock. And so
Okay.
even young people, like students of university. My daughter is still young; she's 28 years, and she also couldn't understand. So I don't want to go into details, but this was for me unbelievable. Unbelievable.
I do agree with you that Corona has been the catalyst for many new discoveries, and some of them being very shocking. I do agree with that. But adopting law and accepting conformity of society does not automatically imply that the person hasn't made their own decision and has come and is carrying a known opinion. So I wouldn't want to judge people on either side of the debate. And I can see very much of the accusations coming from both quarters being applicable to the very originator of the accusation in the first place. So but I think you gave a strong veto in favor of having an own opinion. And I think the time now is very important that we not only have an opinion on our own and keep it uh, to ourselves. I think the time has come where we should be courageous enough, like you said at the beginning, to stand up for our own opinions, always in an attempt to respect the person across the table who has a different opinion and enter a debate, an excursion, an exploration of the minds. So that the synergy can be found, the solution can be found to the highest good of both of them.
Yeah, with that I would agree, that you decide you decide not to keep your own opinion secretly, but to encourage when you express it openly, you encourage others to do the same, and then you realize, wow, we are not a small minority. We are much more than we thought.
Yes.
And also, what Eckhart Tolle says, that he says the evil is increasing, but at the same time, the good is also increasing. But he says the evil makes more alarm. It's louder because of the mass media. You think it's all everything is going to always getting worse, but it isn't. No? So that people meditate, that people hear the earth, that people do so many great things. They find themselves, they form communities, they change into ecological way of life, etc. This is underrepresented in the mass media. So if you only consume the mass media, you get a wrong picture of the world.
Well, I'm not sure whether that's entirely so, that it's underrepresented. It sometimes depends where we're looking at. And I choose to look at the media where I see this well represented and speak to those people. Barbara, I think we're coming to an end. I would like to thank you. I would like to thank you for having led a life publicly where you stood up as an example. Whether people agree with your opinion or not, they were never uncertain about what you thought and how you thought and what your opinion is. And you deserve highest respect for that. And I say namaste to you and thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And dear viewers, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please join us again in 3 weeks. Please subscribe to our channel, to our newsletter. And it's end of the year. Don't be shy to be generous with your donations.